Welcome to 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, the docu-film series. I'm Richard Gage, AIA, architect. My colleague is attorney Mick Harrison. We and our team at the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry invite you to join us on our historic mission to uncover the full truth about 9/11 and realize justice on behalf of the 9/11 victims and their family members. The first part of our docu-film series covers our 17-year investigation into the crime of the century, the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. Yes, you heard that right. 3 WTC high-rises, not just 2, were brought down on September 11th. The 3rd, World Trade Center Building 7, not hit by an airplane. These heinous mass crimes left almost 3,000 citizens dead on 9/11 and millions more afterward. From the 9/11 wars, based on lies about who attacked America that day. As we proceed in developing the evidence of the 9/11 crime scene in this film series, you'll learn that these horrible crimes involved much more than the use of airplanes as weapons. The 9/11 attacks also incorporated bombing crimes, involving the premeditated pre-placement of explosives and incendiaries, crimes that over 2 decades later have not yet been fully acknowledged, investigated, or prosecuted. These unprosecuted bombing crimes greatly exacerbated the tragic loss of life at the World Trade Center on 9/11 and after. This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
This mission, in which we invite you to join us, also involves our 8-year legal battle to get the crime scene evidence before a federal grand jury and into a courtroom. I've had the honor of leading this legal battle on behalf of the Lawyers Committee and certain 9/11 victims' family members and 9/11 responders. It may sound surprising, even amazing, but the 9/11 crime scene evidence that you will hear and see presented in this docu-film series has never been presented to a grand jury by the government. Rather, the government has covered up these 9/11 bombing crimes. Shockingly, the real perpetrators have never been prosecuted and remain at large. Our goals here are very simple. Goal 1, truth and justice for 9/11 victim family members. Goal 2, government transparency and accountability for the 9/11 mass murders.
As you can see, we stand on the steps of the highest court in this nation, the U.S. Supreme Court. It's not a coincidence that we begin our 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom series right here. The Supreme Court, applying and interpreting the Constitution, has established the principles of law that govern the type of grand jury investigation that we seek for these 9/11 bombing crimes, including the grand jury's independence from other branches of government and the grand jury's power and duty to turn over every rock in investigating and getting to the bottom of those actually responsible for these crimes. Not just who the government would have us believe committed these crimes.
And Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is now where our 8-year legal battle has brought us in our relentless quest to see the full 9/11 crime scene evidence presented to a federal grand jury. Our petition for certiorari to the Supreme Court was filed November 3rd, 2022, and docketed November 8th. The Supreme Court declined to hear our petition to review the Second Circuit's decision, which was wrongfully decided, and held that 9/11 family members and 9/11 responders lacked legal standing to enforce delivery of our evidence of the World Trade Center bombing crimes to a federal grand jury. So we're back in D.C. to pursue an important new lawsuit in the U.S. District Court just down the street. In this new lawsuit, we will also ask the federal court to uphold citizens' rights to provide evidence of yet to be addressed federal crimes directly to a federal grand jury. So stay tuned. We'll tell you more about that lawsuit as it develops, which may, in the end, bring us right back here to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court.
So, stay with us. So why are we now standing outside the U.S. District Court here in Washington, D.C.? The answer? This is where we will be continuing our 8-year legal battle to get the 9/11 related evidence that the government has been covering up before a federal grand jury. Mick, now that the Supreme Court has declined to hear our case, as they do with 99% of the cases that they're asked to take up, what are our options here at the D.C. District Court?
Well, we do plan, Richard, to make a new filing here in D.C. That new filing will ask a D.C. federal judge to present 9/11 forensic evidence directly to a federal grand jury. The same federal statute that requires a U.S. attorney to present citizen evidence of federal crimes to a grand jury also recognizes the authority of any federal judge to present such citizen-reported evidence directly to a special criminal grand jury. We are requesting, through this new action, asking a federal judge here in D.C. to exercise that authority on behalf of the plaintiffs. This new action in D.C. will also embrace the evidence of the anthrax letter attacks. Some folks may not remember, those anthrax attacks involved the most egregious first ever attack on the U.S. Congress using a biological weapon. Those attacks targeted 2 U.S. senators, actually attempted to assassinate those 2 U.S. senators who were engaged in holding up the passage of the 9/11 related USA Patriot Act at that time. And the D.C. anthrax attacks were even more closely linked to the day of 9/11 than the government has misled you to believe. In this new filing, we will also be asking the U.S. District Court here in D.C. to uphold the right of citizens to themselves provide evidence directly to a grand jury, including on matters such as the 9/11 World Trade Center demolitions, the anthrax letter attacks, matters which are not already before the grand jury. And this new action, Richard, will include a declaratory judgment count. The purpose of that claim is to ask a federal court to declare the right of every citizen to present evidence of federal crimes directly to a grand jury.
Thanks, Mick. I can see this is going to be an ambitious legal undertaking. And our documentary film series also poses just a few challenges, but we'll show you how you can help. So join us as we continue our mission for 9/11 truth and justice at our new DC filming venue.
Richard, this is another momentous day in our 17-year epic journey to get the 9/11 crime scene evidence into the courtroom. We are approaching the venue in the nation's capital where we're actually going to be preparing our evidence for the eyes of an actual grand jury.
That's right, Mick. What we do here today may well have major consequences, not only for the 9/11 victims' family members, but for the American people and people all around the world.
I agree with that, Richard. We and our colleagues have traveled down this path for several years of trying to get this evidence of the crime of the century into the courtroom. We're not at the end of that road, and we've learned that progress down this road does come at a price.
But there's no turning back now. The public has a right to know all of this evidence, and the 9/11 family members have not only the right to know, but a very deep and personal need to know. And we, all of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, have a duty to expose this truth widely.
I totally agree with that, Richard.
Let's go to work.
Excited about this crime scene to courtroom project.
Wait a second, Mick.
What?
We got to tell everybody about this. This first episode that we're about to film gives us the opportunity to share the strategy and just a peek into the powerful evidence that we'll be diving deeply into with this docu-series. We'd also like to give you a behind-the-scenes, inside perspective into the unique life paths and the 9/11 discoveries that prompted Mick and I to dedicate our lives and, yes, our honor and personal fortunes as well to this difficult and historic mission.
That is true. It is important for all of you, our viewers and partners in this effort, to understand that we will be filming these evidence presentations not only for our filings with the grand jury and filings with the court, and not only as presentations to our volunteers standing in for grand jurors, but also as presentations to each of you. The volunteers taking the part of grand jurors will not be asked to play any active role, for example, by asking questions, but rather that will be one of your assignments should you choose to accept it. You, as a member of the viewing audience, will also have the option of placing yourself in the role of a virtual member of the grand jury. You'll be invited to assess the evidence presented for yourself as you would if you were an actual grand jury member, and to share your assessments with us.
And we'll provide you with the information that you need and how to get more involved as we proceed.
I'm ready.
Me too. Welcome to our behind-the-scenes discussion of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, our docu-film series. To set the stage for why we're here, I really need to show you a couple of film clips. Try to view them objectively, if you can. They are crimes in action at the World Trade Center on 9/11. The explosive destruction itself is evidence that we'll be focusing on in 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. Yes, there are people dying here. I pray for them. I also pray for justice. Mick and I extend our heartfelt apologies to those of you for whom this difficult-to-handle subject continues to be an emotionally wrenching event. Let's pause at this time for a moment of silence in respectful remembrance of those who perished that morning. If Mick and I were not also deeply disturbed by these events, we would not be here doing what we're doing. Mick, are we talking here about mass murder and treason? Also, it's been over 20 years since 9/11. Isn't there a statute of limitations for these crimes?
So, Richard, we are unfortunately talking about mass murder. The crime of treason may require the grand jury investigation to be completed before we can make that determination. In regard to the statute of limitations, there is no deadline for prosecuting a murder crime, and the same is true for treason, because the federal crime of treason has the death penalty. So to help our audience understand who we are, Richard, and how we came to be here, would you mind telling us a bit about your professional background?
Yeah, thanks, Mick. I'm a graduate of the University of Southern California with a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture in 1986, became a licensed architect in 1988. Now have 34 years as a licensed architect, specializing in construction documents and the construction administration of larger commercial institutional projects, including libraries, city halls, high schools, and more recently a $400 million mixed-use project in Las Vegas with 6 blocks of retail, mid-rise office space, and parking structure. That project has 1,200 tons of fireproofed steel framing. Mick, how about your background? You've been fairly busy as well.
I have. I'm a public interest lawyer, 30 years experience. I do whistleblower cases, environmental protection cases, government misconduct, corporate misconduct, and I've been involved with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, as you know, for the last 8 years. We've been doing a legal strategy to promote transparency and accountability regarding 9/11, which is basically what brings me here. So, Richard, how did you actually get involved initially in the 9/11 issue?
In fact, it was on my way back to the office from a construction observation from one of the high school projects in Lafayette, California, actually, where I grew up. When I turned on the radio in my minivan to the KPFA station from Berkeley, California, Bonnie Faulkner, a talk show host, had just started interviewing David Ray Griffin, a 9/11 researcher and author, now of more than 14 books on the subject of 9/11 and the truth about it. It was actually March 29th, 2006, in fact. She was asking him questions about an essay that he had recently published, The 9/11 Oral Histories. It was about the explosive stories that were recorded by the New York City Fire Commissioner of more than 100 first responders who had reported explosions at the World Trade Center high up in the towers, but also in the middle and even at the bottom of the buildings, most of them before the towers even collapsed. He also detailed the compelling evidence that a third tower came down. I was in shock. What? Surely I would know if a third tower came down on 9/11. That's part of my job, to keep up with historically important architectural catastrophes like that.
So, Richard, what else did Professor Griffin talk about in that presentation?
Yeah, he did mention that there were freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 to 8 tons each, trailing thick white smoke clouds. He talked about steel beams being lifted up by the cranes in the aftermath of the World Trade Center rubble pile dripping with molten metal. I hadn't heard any of this from the government or the media. As one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects, I hadn't even received one bulletin about the third tower that fell that day. And no plane had hit it. I was in such shock hearing this information that I couldn't listen to this and drive at the same time. I pulled my van over into the parking lot and just sat there in bewilderment and confusion, which eventually turned to horror and then into anger. Anger especially after I heard even more evidence the next night, because David Ray Griffin was in town at the Grand Lake Theater. The radio show was just the warm-up. I went. The place was packed with 600 people, all equally deeply concerned about what they had heard rumors about, but were about to be, like me, fully confronted with the reality of. But they wouldn't let me in. They turned me and everyone else after that away because every seat had already been taken. I had to go home and listen to it on live stream. I was shocked to my core because I was a flag-waving Reagan Republican, and the implications were starkly clear to me. Elements within our own government and industry were implicated. People that I'd had faith in and even voted for. I got angry because I'd been lied to on a massive scale, as had the rest of us in America, and of course, all around the world.
What did you do about it?
I followed up by researching on the internet, watching DVDs from other great researchers like Stephen Jones, Kevin Ryan, Jim Hoffman, and David Chandler, and others. And I knew deeply in my soul that I had to do serious research as well into these disasters at the World Trade Center. I assembled different bodies of evidence from these researchers and many others over the next few months. I had to tell people about this. I put together a PowerPoint slideshow. I'd never done a PowerPoint before. I took it to the architecture firm in Walnut Creek where I worked. I had been casually talking with some of them during this time, and at first many of them thought I was nuts. But I bought them pizza, put it in the conference room, and lo and behold, all 14 of them showed up for an hour. And after seeing the graphic evidence, they all agreed with me. Oh my God, you're right. These are controlled demolitions. We've got to have a real investigation. I was off and running. I learned that all I had to do was get them in front of the evidence. I found audiences around the San Francisco Bay Area, including my local chapter of the American Institute of Architects. The rate of success was 95 to 100%, measured by a show of hands as to whether a new investigation was necessary. And it's been consistent like this. And Mick, how is it that you came to be involved in the investigation of 9/11?
Richard, that's a similar and interesting story. In around the same time frame, I was working on environmental protection issues in Indiana, walked into a local office of the Indiana Forest Alliance, one of my clients, and I heard someone say, they put bombs in the buildings. And I was taken aback, and I wasn't expecting that to be said in a forest protection meeting. And so I said, "What are you talking about?" I may have said it a little more explicitly. And they explained that they had just heard Dr. David Ray Griffin's presentation, and that there was a developing set of evidence that the 3 buildings that collapsed completely on 9/11 at the Trade Center had actually been brought down using controlled demolition, not simply because they had been hit by airplanes. And that was like a shock to me as well. You know, I do government investigations. This looked like potentially a major government misconduct problem. Whether or not the government was involved, clearly the government should have been focused on that same type of evidence, at least in an investigative capacity. So I decided to see what I could do to find out more about this shocking development. And I asked my clients, I said, "Do you have any evidence of this?" And they said, "Well, yes, a number of experts, scientists, architects, engineers are working on it." And in fact, one of those scientists, a chemist, Kevin Ryan, actually has moved to Bloomington, Indiana, where I was, and they said you could go talk to him. So I did. I introduced myself to Kevin. He actually became my client for a time, and he educated me on the technical evidence about the use of explosives at the Trade Center on 9/11. And as you know from our petition, there's quite a bit of that evidence. You're going to hear about it in our series. So from that, Richard, there was sort of no turning back for me either. And I got involved with a local group in Bloomington, the 9/11 Working Group. We started doing freedom of information requests, doing our own investigation. That, after several years, led me to get involved with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which I co-founded. And as you know, we've been engaged in lawsuits and investigations since for the last 8 years to try to get to the bottom of this. So, Richard, after you were awakened to this issue by Dr. Griffin, I think you started a nonprofit focused on 9/11 Truth regarding the Trade Center demolition issues. Can you explain your role in founding that organization and your subsequent work?
Yeah, well, I knew that I couldn't do this work alone. This was huge. I began attending meetings at the local group, San Francisco Oakland Alliance for 9/11 Truth. The bright and dedicated people there who really care about the fate of our country helped me to assemble and present the best 9/11 evidence. I knew that even though I had great volunteers who worked countless hours getting the office and website into shape and the message out to the world, that I had to have an organization that could stand up to the major endeavor at hand and both look and be professional. And I knew that I had to attract more than those first 14 architects. The 9/11 Truth movement already had pilots for 9/11 Truth, scholars for 9/11 Truth, and even at first, lawyers for 9/11 Truth. But these were buildings. Where were the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth? It was painfully clear there just had to be such an organization. But what? All this was falling on me? Why? God, I still can't answer that question. It was an overwhelming feeling of the buck stops here. I started Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth in 2007 with a nonprofit status. And we've now built the organization to a powerhouse of 3,600 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. The organization was now up and running on all 4 legs with the great help of a lot of volunteers, a very lightly paid staff, and a great number of caring donors all over this country and around the world to ensure its continuing success.
Sounds like a success, Richard. I'm aware that things shifted for you in 2022. Would you share with our audience a little bit about that?
So I've now expanded my mission with the help of my incredible wife and assistant, Gail, at richardgage911.org. In just the last year, we have launched almost 100 video podcasts, interviewing prominent guests in and around the 9/11 Truth movement, organized and hosted topic-specific day-long conferences, spoken at 10 high-profile speaking engagements, and given about 80 radio interviews. We've also given everything we've got to getting the evidence to the grand jury and to the public. That's why we're making this documentary, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. So this moment for 9/11 Truth in the legal system could be truly historic, Mick.
I agree, Richard. So I've had the privilege of representing Richard and architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth in key public interest 9/11 litigation. I want to tell you briefly a little bit about our prior lawsuits, which are really the path that brings us here today, and represent our efforts to date to get our crime scene evidence into a courtroom, and we've been working hard at it. So we've had, Richard, as you know, some Freedom of Information lawsuits. 2 of those have been completed, and one of those is still in progress. It's kind of a key lawsuit. I'll tell you a bit about it. I represent David Cole, who was the FOIA project manager for our nonprofit, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And David sued FEMA and NIST. I'm representing him. And he's trying to get the key evidence used by FEMA when they did their study of the building collapses at the Trade Center on 9/11. A lot of folks know about the other study done by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, but FEMA did the first study. And so David asked FEMA the obvious question in his FOIA request. He asked for all the data records used to do their study. And he wanted to help inform all of us on what evidence FEMA had to do that study. And you all will be surprised to learn that the first response he got from FEMA was, "We have nothing to give you, not a single piece of paper, no records about the data used in our study." And that was as shocking to me as it probably is to you to hear that. But they eventually changed their story, and the story evolved. Eventually FEMA said, well, the reason we don't have any of these data records, we gave them all to NIST, the other organization, for their follow-on study. And so the problem is that, of course, in this modern era, when people use computers, agencies can't really give up all their records to another agency. They're always going to have their records still on their computer systems. They may have given an agency a copy. So it was a bad faith response to a Freedom of Information request. That is basically what prompted me to sue for David. That suit started in 2015. This is 2023. So we've been involved in that lawsuit for 8 years. We've made good progress. We've defeated the government summary judgment motion. We've gotten 3,700 pages of records released, Richard, that were never made available to the public. A lot of videos were released because of our efforts. And notwithstanding that, the key evidence is still being hidden and withheld by FEMA and NIST. And we're still trying to get it. There are key drawings that are still, what would be the word, being concealed. There are key videos of some of the steel that remained after the collapse of the buildings that holds key evidence. We're still trying to get that. So we did defeat the government's initial summary judgment motion. We asked the judge, federal judge in DC, to give us discovery, to let us find out why these documents are still being concealed, why they couldn't find them. They claim not to be able to find them. And you don't usually get discovery in a FOIA case, but we did get a victory, procedural victory there, and were awarded discovery. And we deposed some NIST and FEMA officials. We've acquired some of their records regarding their search, And to make a long story short, we found out through that discovery that both FEMA and NIST essentially engaged in cover-ups. So Richard, on the FEMA side, what we found out is that instead of giving all of their records to NIST, they actually gave none of their records to NIST. What they had was they had a contractor give the contractor's records for the study to NIST, but FEMA kept all of its own records. And so they should have produced those to us. And that was a key finding in our discovery. And the judge is still determining what to do about that at the moment. But that would be, in our view, a violation of the statute. We also found out that NIST engaged in a different kind of cover-up. So when FEMA referred David's FOIA request to NIST, NIST agreed to do a search because they admitted they'd received some of these records from the contractor. What we found out in discovery was that the search that they did was not done in good faith because they limited their search to a single list of records that the contractor, Greenhorn and O'Mara, had given to NIST, but they had more records than that. We found out that another set of records, a large set of videos and other records from the Trade Center on 9/11 had been given to NIST by another contractor, and they didn't search for those records at all, even though they had them in their database. So that's an entire set of records that we were not given. And then the government essentially, in my view, misled the court into thinking that they had actually given my client those records, which never happened. So we're waiting anxiously to get the final decision in that case. Now, that was not the only litigation of significance that we pursued to get us here today. We, as you know, we sued the FBI. I believe you were probably a plaintiff in that lawsuit. And a lot of our viewers don't know that there was a second, emphasized second, 9/11 commission. Most folks know about the first one. The second one was called the 9/11 Review Commission. It was required by Congress of the FBI. The FBI was supposed to evaluate all 9/11 evidence in this second commission study, including all the evidence that they had not addressed the first time around. And you and I know there's a lot of evidence they did not address the first time around, including all the demolition evidence. So we sued the FBI because the study they did do a study. But when they released it, I believe it was 2015, it was essentially a whitewash, and they just ignored, again, all the key evidence, including the demolition evidence. So we sued them, and that was the Lawyers Committee, yourself, I believe architects and engineers. We had a family member, a 9/11 family member involved, and the short version of that is we technically lost that lawsuit. We didn't lose it because we were wrong. There was no finding that, the commission had done its job. We lost it because the court decided that even a 9/11 family member or nonprofits investigating 9/11 did not have legal standing to pursue our claim, even if the law had been violated. And that's where that case sits at the moment. Now, we do plan to follow up on that, Richard. As you know, there's always a plan B in our strategies. We're not easily put off. And the plan B in this case is to go to Congress itself, because the excuse the court used to keep us out of court on that case was that Congress had not put in the language of the statute the exact requirement to do the study, to look at all the evidence. It was actually put in what we call legislative history. And so we think we can fix the problem by going back to Congress and having them put in the magic language. And we might end up getting a new real study based on that. The other lawsuit I'll mention for now, which we had decided recently, as you know, we went to New York. We filed our petition with all the demolition evidence that you and your colleagues helped develop. And we believe we articulated it well in our petition with a lot of the exhibits from your work and your colleagues' work attached. We gave it to the U.S. Attorney. The U.S. Attorney has a legal obligation, and some of you may not know this, and you should know it. Every U.S. Attorney has a legal obligation when a citizen reports a federal crime to relay that evidence to a federal special grand jury. This is not a discretionary matter where the U.S. Attorney can exercise their own judgment or opinion. They have to do it. Now, we use that law, which for those who are checking, 18 U.S.C. 3332A. And the problem is that the U.S. Attorney decided, from all indications, simply to thumb their nose at their obligation, and they didn't give the evidence to the grand jury. So we sued them. And the Lawyers Committee was involved. I believe you were a plaintiff in that case as well. And we had surviving family members of victims of 9/11 as co-plaintiffs. We had 9/11 responders as co-plaintiffs. And we wanted something very simple. We just wanted the court to tell the U.S. Attorney to do their job, which the statute requires. And disturbingly, the federal court, first in the district, in the Southern District of New York, and later in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, decided that none of our plaintiffs had standing in that case either. And I think that's a wrong decision. We did do a petition to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unfortunately denied our petition. They didn't say we were wrong. They didn't decide our case on the merits. The Supreme Court actually said, we're just not going to hear the case. So it may get back to the court at some point in the future through another litigation. So that issue has not been decided by the highest court. So that is one of the reasons we are continuing our press to get the crime scene evidence to the grand jury, the crime scene evidence you're about to hear from Richard and his experts. So that is what brings us here. We're still pressing to get that crime scene evidence to a grand jury. We haven't given up. We have a new legal plan, actually, a plan B even for that. And as we've mentioned, that will bring us to the U.S. District Court in D.C.
Well, Mick, you also became involved in creating a lawyer-based nonprofit organization focused on 9/11 transparency and accountability. Can you tell us about that and the organization's efforts today?
Sure. So the history of legal actions I've just summarized for you. The lead plaintiff in those cases was my nonprofit, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. We incorporated that in 2014. The group is controlled by a set of lawyers with, however, significant help from investigators, non-lawyers who are concerned about the issue. We've been doing an ongoing investigation in addition to our lawsuit. So we're not just a litigating entity at this point. The nonprofit is committed to transparency regarding 9/11, which means bringing the full truth out. We're hoping to achieve that for the family members of the victims. And we're also hoping that we get that full truth out because we think Congress needs to know it so they can do what is necessary to fix this problem. We're actually even hoping that law enforcement will start paying attention to this evidence. So that's one of our goals. The other goal is accountability. That's the first goal is challenging, as you know, but the second goal, accountability, is even more of a challenge. What we mean by that is the perpetrators who committed these crimes, the bombing crimes that you're going to be presenting the evidence on, they're still out there. They have not been investigated, prosecuted, they've not been brought to justice, and yes, they are still at large. So accountability means bringing the perpetrators to justice, and that's what our nonprofit is committed to do. So Richard, that gives a good feel for what I've been doing on this issue. How do you see your role regarding the production of this crime scene to courtroom film series?
Well, when I separated from AE 9/11 Truth, I joined the LC 9/11 board and partnered with you guys to provide technical and fundraising support. The most fortuitous and productive project to emerge from this partnership is 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, the docu-film series. We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan. to present to a special criminal grand jury. Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields: high-rise architects, structural engineers, fire protection engineers, firefighters, and a host of others, speaking directly to the grand jury on the overwhelming, irrefutable forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony. Yes, they will actually see this film, if we have our way. And we're not stopping until they do. In the meantime, we're asking each of you to share this incredible information and evidence with your colleagues, your friends, family, with your elected representatives, and the media. The word is going to go out through you.
Richard, can you give us an idea of the types of 9/11 crime scene evidence that the grand jury would get to see and that the public, in their role as virtual grand jurors, would also get to see via the upcoming episodes of our film series?
Yeah, we're going to be taking it head on, the faulty NIST building reports for these 3 high-rise collapses. And through the course of this docu-film series, demonstrate clearly to the grand jury that these were, in fact, not collapses at all, but explosive, controlled demolitions. We'll start by showing the distinct features of typical building demolitions and then expose how those features and many more are exhibited in all 3 towers. The features include eyewitness accounts of and seismic evidence for explosions, extreme temperatures, inexplicable by the official narrative, molten steel and iron, and the critical implications of that, hot sulfur corrosion attacks on the World Trade Center steel, evidence of ignited thermite in the form of billions of previously molten iron microspheres in all the World Trade Center dust samples, proof of foreknowledge of the Building 7's destruction, and the incredible implications of that, evidence of unignited nanothermite in the form of red-gray chips found throughout the World Trade Center dust. And guess what? Most all of this shocking evidence will be coming right from official sources. And we're bringing it all out, Mick. Well, given your legal background, how do you see your role regarding the production of 9/11 crime scene to courtroom?
So, Richard, my primary role is to give the legal framework for a grand jury inquiry, where I'll be helping the grand jurors understand not only their duties, but also their powers. And grand juries have quite a bit of power. They can subpoena witnesses, they can actually negotiate immunity to get witness testimony. They can, as the Supreme Court has said, and should, turn over every stone to get to the bottom of whether the crime was committed, and if it was, the whodunit part. So they do have very broad authority, and I'll help the grand jurors understand that. I'll also be talking about different categories of evidence that the grand jury will be hearing. A lot of what Richard will be presenting is evidence from experts. An expert opinion will be something the grand jurors need to know how to evaluate, whether the experts have the proper credentials, whether their opinions are based on established facts, and so forth. So I'll be helping the grand jurors understand their role, but also the viewers understand the law that controls this grand jury inquiry. A lot of our viewers watch on television crime stories and attorney dramas, and something that everyone needs to understand about this grand jury process is this is not a trial. Formal rules of evidence do not apply. So can the grand jurors receive and listen to and even credit hearsay? Yes. Can they listen to someone's opinion? Yes. Can they even just take a clue, a lead, a suggestion and follow up? Yes. So they don't have to restrict themselves to admissible evidence, unlike in a regular trial. So that gives you the gist of my role.
Mick, to what extent does the law constrain or limit the types of evidence that the grand jury can consider in a case like this? For example, are all the types of evidence that I listed fair game for a grand jury presentation?
Short answer is yes. The grand jury can receive and consider any type of evidence, hearsay, opinion evidence, mere leads, suggestions, but also scientific studies, test results, physical evidence like a piece of steel, anything the grand jury feels like they need to get to the bottom of whether the crime was committed and who may have committed the crime. They can subpoena it, they can order it produced, they can question witnesses about it. They could even call you in, Richard, and have you explain it if they chose. So there's no limitation on the power of the grand jury. So Richard, regarding the scientific evidence, in some cases it's not just persuasive, it's actually dispositive. So when you're talking about a category of evidence like extreme temperatures that can only be explained one way, that's dispositive evidence. So some evidence may be direct, some may be circumstantial. Circumstantial evidence, as you probably understand, the audience may not, requires an inference to get to the conclusion. Direct evidence does not require an inference. So direct evidence may be sufficient standing alone. Other evidence may have a persuasive effect when considered cumulatively with the balance of the evidence. The key, as we'll no doubt remind you as we proceed to hear this evidence, is that no matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth, to quote Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, Mick, we know from your legal research for our lawsuits that the U.S. Attorney has a federal statutory duty to provide citizen reports of federal crimes to a special criminal grand jury, even though that duty is currently being ignored. But does the grand jury itself have duties under the law?
Well, yes, as I noted, the primary duty of the grand jury is to determine if a crime was committed, and if so, who committed that crime. The grand jury can propose an indictment. They also, many people don't know, after they evaluate all the evidence, they can actually issue a report of government corruption. But they are expected to pursue and evaluate every piece of evidence, turn over every rock. In addition to that, sort of, what would be the word, investigation leading to an indictment process, if they happen to discover government misconduct along the way, they're allowed to expose that government misconduct even if it doesn't rise to the level of a federal crime. And so they can issue a report on any government misconduct they find as they proceed with their investigation, and even if they don't issue an indictment. So if the evidence is sufficient, not only on the crime being committed, but on the whodunit aspect, then the grand jury can actually propose to the prosecutor to indict person X. And you'll notice we won't be naming names in this portion of our film series. Stay with us if we move forward to the cover-up and then to the whodunit portion you may hear more about. So Richard, before we begin filming our episode 2, which will be our first installment in our grand jury presentation of the actual evidence in this series, how do you plan to deal with this report by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that concluded that Building 7 collapsed only due to fire?
Well, Mick, I'm going to be quite upfront about the absurdity of this NIST report. People all around the world have been misled by the official NIST reports. We and our panel of experts will actually present a point-by-point technical rebuttal of dozens of statements from Shyam Sunder, the project leader at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They were tasked by Congress to explain these collapses, all three of them, World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, to the American people. It Is this approach acceptable, though, legally, Mick, for a grand jury presentation?
Yes, given that the grand jury will likely either already be aware of that NIST World Trade Center 7 report, it's been pretty public, or will become aware of it during their inquiry, because they're going to have to trip over it if they do their homework. To ignore it would invite some grand jurors, particularly those without a scientific or technical background, to simply accept uncritically this government agency's provably false claims and conclusions. So it's important for us to keep the grand jury focused on the fact that the elements of the Trade Center bombing crimes are proven directly by the crime scene evidence, the evidence that you will be discussing and your experts, and that the NIST report is simply being discussed and rebutted to ensure that that report doesn't mislead the grand jurors and confuse them into thinking that somehow the scientific evidence on the presence and use of explosives and incendiaries at the Trade Center is somehow inadequate. So your role is essentially to counter what I consider to be government propaganda in that regard. So after the next episode, Richard, episode 2 in this film series, which will focus on the crime scene evidence regarding the collapse of Building 7 on 9/11. And just as a reminder to folks, that's the third building that fell, not hit by an airplane. How do you see this crime scene to courtroom film series progressing after that?
Well, while Building 7 shows every indication of being a classic controlled demolition, we need to also look very carefully at the destruction of the Twin Towers as well. We'll discover that they were, on the other hand, a very explosive event, one that was in fact witnessed and documented on tape by 156 first responders. Professor Graham McQueen performed exhaustive research on these first responder testimonies. Some of the firefighters who experienced that explosive horror will be here to talk about it too. We'll be showing documentation and video testimony of laterally ejected, freely flying structural steel sections weighing up to 8 tons, landing 600 feet from the towers in all directions, trailed by thick white smoke clouds, equally distributed all around, well outside each tower, such that 100,000 tons of steel could not then possibly be available to crush the building section below. We'll show the evidence of 90,000 tons of concrete from each tower, pulverized to a fine powder, distributed from river to river across lower Manhattan. Imagine the grand jurors' reaction when we asked them, if it's not the steel and it's not the concrete, which together comprise about 3/4 of the weight of the towers, then how does the building below even get crushed? And Mick, I've heard that you plan to add a whole nother series of episodes related to the cover-up of 9/11 crime scene evidence, and ultimately addressing the grand jury's challenge of identifying who done it.
Well, that's true, Richard. We are planning an additional series of episodes, actually 2 series. One will be on the cover-up, as you mentioned, the other on the ultimate question, who done it? And we're progressing in this series of episodes, starting with the actual crime scene evidence, in the same way we have progressed with our investigation. So we're going to present this to the public and to the grand jurors in the same logical sequence that we're developing it. So we're moving from the crime scene evidence that, demolition crimes occurred, bombing crimes occurred. We're then moving to how the government treated that evidence or didn't, in this case by covering it up. And then we're getting to the ultimate question of who done it. So that's how we intend to progress in the series. One quick note for now about the cover-up evidence. Evidence of a government cover-up is actually corroborating evidence that the bombing crimes happened. You may want to stop and think about that for a second. Normally, you're looking at direct evidence and circumstantial scientific evidence, which you'll be presenting a lot of, to show that explosives were present, the building collapsed like a controlled demolition. That's the standard way of proving a bombing crime. But the question I'll leave you to ponder for the moment is, if we end up showing a sophisticated government cover-up, why would there need to be a cover-up if there was no crime? You don't need a cover-up if there's no crime to cover up. And so circumstantially, the existence of the cover-up, which we will be talking about in the later episodes, corroborates your scientific evidence that the bombing crimes actually occurred.
Well, enough from us. We want to hear from you. We don't want you to just watch 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jurors during each episode. And we're encouraging you to judge the evidence as if you were yourself a grand juror. And you can provide us your individual assessment of the veracity of the evidence and the eyewitness testimony. And give us your feedback on our website, 911crimescenetocourtroom.org, or simpler, 911c2c.org. We can incorporate changes and improvements provided by you in the upcoming series. Then join us for an online conference call immediately following the release of each episode. Don't worry, we'll remind you when you add your email to the C2C release reminder list. Here's more that you can do on the 911c2c.org website. Share evidence and investigative strategies with our team. Suggest potential witnesses for the grand jurors to question. Put potential witnesses and whistleblowers in contact with our team. And of course, donate to the 9/11 C2C effort. Actually, these initial C2C episodes are more of a beginning than an end. Until 9/11 transparency and accountability are achieved, our investigation will be ongoing. It's all on the website, 911crimescenetocourtroom.org, or simpler, again, 911c2c.org. And here's a tough one for you all to ponder as you anticipate our next episode of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. How does a 47-story, steel-framed, fireproof building like World Trade Center 7, not hit by an airplane, collapse suddenly, uniformly, and completely by fire on 9/11, when no such building in history has ever collapsed due to fire?
While you ponder this question, I invite you, along with the grand jury, to join us in our upcoming episode 2 as we present the crime scene evidence and testimony, during which we will see evidence and hear the testimony from several experts who will address this mystery head on.
See you in the next episode, where we launch into World Trade Center Building 7.